Hello, and welcome to Cinema to the Letter. This episode is that masterpiece known as Let the Right One In. On Cinema to the Letter, we break down the very nature of cinema, letter by letter. For each episode of a film miniseries topic, we cover 6 films that either fit a C for classic, an I for an indie, an N for new, an E for egregious, M for masterpiece, or A for atypical. Who doesn't love an acronym, am I right? I am Thomas, and guys, you just missed out because right as I was walking in here, all my cats just were eating my flesh. They just swarmed on me. It was really rough, but don't worry. Thank God this isn't a video podcast, because I am just bleeding profusely. But it's all good. As we learned from this movie, it can look beautiful and cinematic.
Fucking cats. Hi, I'm Bryan, and I also don't know how she did that Rubik's Cube. I was always so bad at Rubik's Cubes as a kid, so...
Terrible at him as well.
I don't know how she did that.
I remember this is a great tangent to start off this episode with. I was so much of a Simpsons kid that I got every single bit of Simpsons merchandise possible, including a Homer Simpson head Rubik's Cube.
Okay. Was it just him making different faces on the 6?
No, but it was a bust of Homer Simpson's head. That
Okay.
just you would move.
Oh, the Rubik's Cube was Homer's head.
Homer's head, yes. What a weird piece of merchandise. There's so much weird Simpsons merchandise. We could devote a whole podcast just to covering Simpsons merchandise.
That's true.
But that's one of the weirder ones.
I was thinking each of the little squares was a different Homer face or something like that.
No, that would be too simple.
That's true. It would.
Though it was really hard for me to even solve that. Weirdly.
That sounds like it would be hard because it's a head.
Right, and it's all the different pieces. You think it'd be easy because you know what Homer's head looks like because I had all those action figures. Anyway, so Let the Right One In is our subject for the day. That's our M for masterpiece pick for horror. And we should note this isn't technically our first foreign language film on the show.
Technically, yes.
Because Black Sabbath was, the most readily available version is dubbed in Italian. And I would argue Let the Right One In feels more like a definitive, this is our first foreign language film. And I think that's key because honestly, a big thing about this movie I didn't really think about until we picked it was this was a key example for me of I had watched foreign movies prior to this movie coming out, but it was definitely one of the first times I can remember hearing about a movie released in a foreign territory and being immediately I need to find out the US release. I've heard so much great things about this. Being on the ground level for a foreign language movie growing a huge cult attention.
It seems like a prime example of if you've never seen a foreign film maybe, or if you are interested in foreign films, this seems like a very good entry point.
Yes.
In many ways. But yeah, so I'm very curious. So did you see it kind of around the time of its release, or when did you first see this movie?
Well, I mean, it would have been not its original release in Sweden on October 24th, 2008. I think it would have been, I don't know, probably the spring after that, 2009. I would think. I don't know. I don't have that release date information on hand. But, okay, I'm actually saying, March 2009, Magnet Films puts it out in America.
Right.
Back when, I remember that logo so well, Magnet releasing. That was just any interesting movie that was the kind of genre that I was looking for was under Magnet. And I remember just hearing about it. And then particularly, this is a great example for me of I watched this movie with my 160 gigabyte iPod that I had. That was my prized possession. And I would often rent movies on iTunes, put them on that iPod. And then I had a literal thing that was the red, yellow, white cables that plugged into my iPod. So I can watch it on my
Whoa.
television, which is like, this is the greatest invention, that I can watch 480 res
Yeah.
on my television. But
From
yeah,
your
that's how I remember
iPod.
distinctly watching this movie.
That's so funny. Yeah, I definitely would have watched it. I think around high school or college. I think it also was kind of one of those like foreign films, especially of the 21st century, that you sort of need to see, especially because it's like of its depiction of vampires and stuff like that, which we'll get into, of course. But yeah,
Yeah, and this is definitely also one because I like traveled a lot of like sort of film critic sites and stuff like that from just genre critics who were just like, this is like the great new vampire movie, you got to see it. So yeah, it definitely has that kind of reputation. We've kind of started talking about the movie already, so let's go ahead and play the trailer now for Let the Right One In.
Är du vampyr?
Hade du tyckt om mig ändå?
So yeah, Let the Right One In, which, like I said, came out October 24th, 2008 in Sweden, is based on the novel by the screenwriter, John Livqvist. Sorry, I'm going to be fucking up some Swedish names. All of the, look, I'm a proud supporter of Sweden and all of its natural exports.
Thomas is holding up a figurine of the Swedish chef from the Muppets.
What? I mean, that's most of my Swedish culture, really. It's Ingmar Bergman and Swedish Chef, the most important cultural touchstones.
Those are, yes, absolutely, the most important Swedish figures of all time.
Love it anytime they would make the Swedish Chef do Bergman. There's a sketch on the Muppet Show where they make him do like the seventh seal with like the. It's really funny. Anyway, so Let the Right One In. I have read this novel. I'm guessing, have you?
I have not read this novel, but it's very. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts then, since you have read it.
Well, yeah. I read it, by which I mean I listened to the audiobook. As I was preparing for, I did a panel at DragonCon in 2019 for Let the Right One In. It was sort of like an anniversary thing. And so I listened to the audiobook and I rewatched this movie and Let Me In. That was the last time I watched Let Me In. We'll talk about that in a moment, folks. But the novel, I will say, is one of the great examples to me. Because, like, the general reputation is like the book's always better than the movie. The book, or at least it's like different in an interesting way or whatever. The book is very similar plot-wise, but what gets removed by Lindquist for his adaptation is a lot of the detail. And a lot of that detail is very graphic about, some of the implications, say, about the character Hakan, right? That's the guy who's the caretaker for Ellie.
Yes, right. I don't know if he's ever. I don't know if his name is ever said in the movie, but yeah, that is what he's credited as.
Right. Yes. But there's a lot more detail about what's kind of implied in the movie, very subtly, that he maybe is a pedophile, has some sort of like predilection toward children. They make that underlined, an extremely unfortunate detail.
Really?
Yeah. And I mean, I get it, because I think in the novel he's kind of trying to equate, like, he's trying to make sort of Ellie's situation even more upsetting. Of just like, oh, not only does she only have one friend, but this friend actually has this sort of interest in her in a different way. I get why that's there in the book. It's just a problem of, like, I don't want to be reading pages and pages about this, really. Like, there's other things as well where I think the detail just kind of, like, tries to soak you in the misery of this sort of world, as opposed to what I like about the movie is that it gives you sort of a gateway into, like, this is a very upsetting story, but there's kind of an odd, tragic beauty to it at the same time, whereas in the novel he is just like putting your nose in it like you're a dog, just like, look at this, look at the depths of humanity.
Yeah, like that like makes it sound like a Lars von Trier movie or something, where like the movie itself is very very beautiful and very sweet in a lot of ways, but it is also kind of horrifying in other ways.
Which is the hanging cloud over this movie is just that upsetting nature of it. Just it's always there.
Right. It is very sad, but it feels more right. It feels like it's more a sort of atmosphere of that sort of sadness and kind of like that sort of that childhood kind of loneliness, of course. And that's what I think makes this movie so interesting, though, is that sort of horror that is juxtaposed by the admittedly quite beautiful sequences at times.
Yeah. I think this is the first vampire movie we've technically covered, right? Because Black Sabbath kind of has a vampire.
Well,
but...
Van Helsing has
that's
the
true.
king of vampires.
I'm sorry, Dracula. That's true. That's right. Okay, this is the first, like, serious vampire movie we've covered. The first, like, let's get real, everybody, vampire movie we've covered.
Are you saying that Van Helsing is on a serious film, Thomas?
Something I've realized really about vampire fiction is, like, the stuff I really, truly love about vampires is just, like, there's an inherent kind of mix of, like, there is a joy, but, like, keeping that curse really central at the same time. Because, like, here's something interesting. I have a vampires ranked list, because I'm a weirdo on Letterboxd.
Oh, like all the vampire movies you've seen?
I also have a Dracula list, which I kind of, like, separate those two, because, like...
You kind of have to.
The vampires list is 84. If I had a Dracula, then it would just be, like,
double,
overload.
Basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But so my top 5 I have here, I've got a weird mix where I've got Thirst, recent edition.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
A movie, you know what, I'm going to save the title for, because someone might be talking about it later on the show. Plug. Then What We Do in the Shadows. Then Let the Right One In. And then The First Blade.
Interesting. That's a bit controversial. I feel like
I
prefer Blade 2, but I also don't... It's not... The gap isn't as far for me from Blade 1 to Blade 2.
I would say it's not extremely far from me either the other way. It's just... Yeah. But the point is, all those movies, despite being varying different genres, all have sort of that, like, central conceit of, like, God, we shouldn't exist. This is, like, a terrible thing to be.
Yeah.
And it's rough. And some people, go out and fight Steven Dorff, and others sort of wallow in their misery.
Yeah, it is the sort of, like, contradiction almost of the vampire as, like, both this very romantic, very, like, beautiful sort of creature, I guess, and also the fact that it is a literal bloodthirsty creature that is, like, literally murders people. It is sort of an interesting, like, balancing act that this movie, I think, does very, very well, and is one of the better ones to, I think, handle that in a more quote-unquote serious way.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious, what was your perception of this movie before? Because you, given our age gap, you would have been aware of this movie before. So what was, like, the reputation you sort of gleaned from it?
Yeah, it was one of those, like I mentioned before, kind of like the, like, baby's first foreign films kind of thing of, like, watch a first foreign film. And it was that. I kind of knew of it as a vampire film, and I had mainly known it through Thomas Alfredson, the director of the film. Because I think I would have. We will talk about it. Yes. I mean, like, I would have, I think, found out about this movie, or I would have watched this movie around the time that The Snowman was coming out in theaters.
Setting up your expectations even worse.
Right. I watched that and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which, I mean, should we talk about Thomas Alfredson a bit?
Before we get to that, you didn't finish your point.
Right. I'm sorry.
Right.
So when I watched this kind of in the lead up to The Snowman, I was very interested in it because I had, heard a lot of great things, and I was very interested in this vampire movie that was treating vampires with a bit more groundedness. I don't like using that term as much because I think like grounded and like realistic, all those terms can kind of, the connotation can often be with like, dark and gritty, Snyderverse kind of shit. But like a more grounded version of a vampire that was also, it's a Swedish film. I am very fascinated by Sweden. Obviously, I love like Ingmar Bergman, of course, but I think it's just a place that fascinates me. I love just the architecture, the snow of it, of course, with this, especially this movie. Yeah, but when I was going into it, I think it was the sort of grounded vampire film that was about kids, and I love this movie. I think it's absolutely just great. It really grows for me every time I see it as well. Where like watching it a few years ago, I thought like, oh, this is a great little vampire movie, and then watching it this time, I was like, oh, this is a very beautiful and kind of sad and very. It's got a lot of things it's trying to kind of talk about in this movie. It's a really unique movie.
Yes. So, we kind of referenced him earlier. Let's go ahead and dig a bit into a fellow Thomas Alfredson, who's our director here, who before this had directed, because I'm looking at his letterbox thing, which I know has a lot of different...
Yeah, it has a lot of like short films and like TV stuff he would have done before.
Right, because he obviously like worked in Sweden before this. This isn't his first film, right?
No, I'm seeing that he directed this, what looks like a long movie called, Fyra nyanser av brunt, which is like a 3-hour, it looks like a movie, but I don't know. This is kind of his first, I would say, theatrically released film, though.
Okay, so, because, this is the first time at least us dumb Americans were aware of him to any degree. And right. So you had, like, Let the Right One In comes out, and, like, at the time, like, oh my god, this is so great, I gotta see whatever this guy's next movie is. And they announced Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which on paper I was like, oh, I don't know if this is gonna appeal to me, I don't know if this is gonna work for me. And that movie's great. That movie rules.
Masterpiece. Absolute masterpiece. Just disorienting film, and has so much of the qualities that make him an interesting director. I love that movie, but go on, because something interesting happens.
Well, yeah, and that movie, if you don't know, by the way, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is the spy movie that takes place during the Cold War, and it's got the most amazing cast of all time, with like specifically white British dudes. You got Gary Oldman, Colin Firth, Tom Hardy, Mark Strong, one of John Hurt's last movies.
The great John Hurt.
Wonderful him. John Hurt. Toby Jones, Ciarán Hinds, Benedict Cumberbatch. Just all the British men. So many of them.
And is just one of the, like, a genuine, when people use the term, like, gritty spy thriller, this is one of the only, like, genuinely gritty spy thrillers that is, like, incredibly, like, the atmosphere of this movie and just the way it handles, like, the spy thriller is unreal. I like one of my favorite, I think, spy thrillers of all time.
Also, I won't spoil a thing about it, but one of my favorite endings of all time. That montage set to the La Mer is just like one of my favorite just uses of a song in a movie, and just the editing of that sequence, so good. But yeah, so 2 for 2. Great. Tomas, buddy. Can't wait for what you got next. And what he had next sounded interesting. It was the movie you mentioned earlier, The Snowman, which, based on the Harry Hole books. His actual character name.
Every time I'm reminded of that, it makes me laugh.
So good. But Harry Hole, played by Michael Fassbender. And I know J.K. Simmons was in that movie. There's a lot of, like...
There is. You've got...
Val Kilmer, but...
Val Kilmer. You've got Charlotte Gainsbourg, J.K. Simmons. You've got Toby Jones again.
Chloe Sevigny, I remember, because she plays twins inexplicably in that movie, and they don't announce it very well.
God, I did not rewatch this movie. I am fascinated by it. I really have been meaning to rewatch it, but
we should have that. It's a potential E for egregious pick. There's a lot to talk about with that movie.
Yeah,
but I'll just say Chloe Sevigny in the movie at one point, spoilers, she plays a character who Harry Hole is like meeting up with, and then she dies, and then Chloe Sevigny shows up again, And you're like, wait, what? And then she says, oh, I'm her twin sister. Like, wait, why are we finding this out now?
Yeah, that is a weird movie. It is, it makes no sense. It is like, and I believe it was a victim of like studio interference.
Well, literally,
if I remember
Thomas
correctly.
Alfredson said apparently, like, they didn't shoot something like 20% of the script. Like, that's how rushed the production was.
And
you
feels
can
like it.
tell.
You really can tell. It is a prime example of while you're watching a movie, you're like, it feels like there's bits missing. Like I feel like there's like scenes just plucked out of this thing. It is
Like the movies, I saw that theatrically.
same.
It felt like watching just like a movie collapse in front of you. Like it was an actual structure, like Jenga. It's cinematic Jenga, just like falling. Right in front of your face.
And it just, I remember in the trailer, it was like, it was executive produced by Martin Scorsese. Although
Who was going to direct it at a certain point.
Yes,
I think that's the
yeah.
whole thing, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think he kind of backed off of it, but they still definitely used that to market the movie.
Well, yeah, because Thomas was just like, well, Marty will make sure I get final cut. That's his thing. He becomes a producer, and then he gives me final cut. It's like my cut, which is his cut. And then even Marty's just like, I'm sorry, but I can't do it. No, I'm sorry. I just can't do it. I gotta go shine a light. I'm sorry. I gotta go to the Stones concert. I'm sorry.
I gotta make TikToks with my daughter.
No, this is 2008. That wouldn't have happened yet.
That's true. Yes, but a very bad movie, unfortunately. But it is like, it feels like one of those situations where a great filmmaker makes a bad movie, but it isn't entirely their fault. And I would even say, from what I remember of The Snowman, there are the bits feel well directed. You know, it is just, like we said earlier, it just feels very incomplete.
Yeah, so that movie didn't work out for him, obviously. But he has made at least one other film that I can't find an English translation. Se upp för Tunnelsligen? Sure. I don't know. It's a Swedish comedy. It stars a bunch of Swedish people I never heard of, no Skarsgårds or anything. But
yeah, it looks like it kind of doesn't
exist.
Well, it also has not been released. Like it has only
in the
been
US.
released in like Europe. So
Okay.
yeah.
I don't know. I hope the best for that dude, though. He's a very talented director based on just those two movies I like.
I do too. Yeah, he feels like the type of I hope that he either gets to like make something he wants to make in the Hollywood system, because clearly like Hollywood was like just they fucking snatched this guy up.
Well, and isn't Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy a British movie, right? Or is that an American? It just seems really British.
I think it is very British. I'm trying to find out who. Yeah, it was like Studio Canal and like It was a very British.
So the
movie.
Brits first got him, just like pip pip cheerio, Thomas.
Yeah, and then Hollywood got him and didn't do
Slammed
great.
him
But
into the ground.
yeah, but I either I hope he can get something made in Hollywood, or I hope he, goes back to Sweden. Not in a xenophobic way, like just in a
Get out of here! Go back to
Go
Sweden!
back to your country, Sweden.
Get your much paler asses out of my country.
Yeah. So I hope he gets to, hopefully make something that he wants to make.
In Swedish, because that's something that often happens with like really great foreign film directors who get a chance to make a movie here. And then, because that recently happened with, I forgot what the guy's name is, but he did Rare Exports, which was a really great like sort of Christmas horror movie out there for everybody, where it's like someone discovers Santa is like an eternal being that's like a Lovecraftian monster almost.
Cool.
And the kids have to capture it. It's like the kids are going to save the day from demonic Santa.
Cool.
Then he did the Samuel Jackson movie Big Game, which is like a kid has to save President Samuel Jackson from like terrorists. It's like Die Hard. It's trying to be kind of funny, but it's bad. It's very bad. Jim Broadbent has a German accent in it.
Okay.
And I'm like, why would you get Jim Broadbent? Oh, no, sorry. He has an American accent. That's the thing. He's playing like the
that's
Secretary
worse.
of Defense. And it's like, why? If you get
Yeah.
Jim Broadbent, you want a big bushy beard. But then he just recently did that movie Sisu, which rules. Even like it's not a horror movie, but it's very gory, very fun.
Right.
About, like the old man who's like the most excellent special forces guy that ever lived, and these Nazis fuck with him in Sweden. So then he just like kicks their asses. Like that's the kind of thing I would hope for most foreign film directors. That kind of like comeback when they return to making a movie mostly like with their home country, but it rarely happens. Like even as much as I love Del Toro, which I do, love Del Toro, Guillermo, so much, but I would love to see him do another just Spanish movie. I don't know if he ever will do that, but I hope so.
Yeah, because he did that. He sort of like, he made his first few films. He made a Mimic, right?
In America,
yes. Yeah, which was like a bad experience for him.
Well, then he did go back. He made briefly
Pan's
because
Labyrinth.
Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth were both like Spanish productions.
Yeah, so he's like done it before. So it's an interesting thing, I think, when like a filmmaker from a different country sort of comes to America and then kind of goes back and gets a chance to make something. Yeah, so I hope that happens for him because he is a great director, as we'll get into with this movie as well. But yeah.
So let's just get into the movie then.
Yes.
Stepping around everything. So if you're unaware of this movie, it takes place in 1982, but not in an annoying way. There's like Rubik's Cubes, and there's like some, I guess, Swedish pop songs from the 80s that we hear. But that's about it. We follow Oscar, who is our young boy protagonist. He's about 12 years old, and he's, not very popular. He gets picked on by some brutal bullies. Like,
they're so mean.
Motherfuckers.
They're just so mean. Just horrible children.
You know what? At that point, horrible person. There's no kids anymore. You're just a horrible piece of shit person.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they seem pretty bad. They do a lot of like, hey, piggy squeal. And like, I wish I could cut your throat or whatever. Which, to be fair, is what Oscar is saying in private. There's a point where he's like stabbing a tree. And just like, and so, not great look for a 12-year-old to be alone stabbing stuff in the middle of nowhere. Especially when someone is watching him in the distance. And it turns out to be Ellie, who is this young, I don't know, this is kind of tough based on the context of who she is. This young person.
Yeah.
Who just
appears like a 12-year-old girl.
Right.
In appearance.
Yes. And so that initially kind of like sparks an interest. They have a bit of a conversation there. Basically, the movie kind of shuffles between Oscar's real life and then him hanging out with this vampire. And a lot of sort of background stuff about the vampire character, particularly because she has a guardian, Hakan, as I brilliantly said before. I was trying to make sure I didn't say Eli at all during this.
They do say it like Elle, like they
Elle,
yeah,
right.
It's Swedish, yeah.
Yes. But so this guy who is implied to be Ellie's guardian, and there might be a bit more context to it because as is revealed to us, basically through him trying to capture somebody, trying to drain their blood in the middle of the snowy Swedish woods. He does that a couple times earlier in the movie, and we kind of get a sense of this town as well, where there's like, say, a group of 4 adults who also kind of weave in and out of the story.
Yeah.
And, while this is going on, at a certain point, Hakan ends up getting caught as he's about to kill somebody, and then proceeds to damage his face with acid, and then Ellie comes over and pays him a visit, while he's in the hospital.
In the hospital, yeah. Doesn't bring flowers, but...
it's kind of cliche at this point. Just bring your big old hug. Big old hug. And then a body slam.
A big old vampire hug.
For sure. So, yeah, with all that set up, it does definitely, like, the moment I can still remember watching this movie, and this opening scene happens, and I was like, this is unlike any other vampire movie I've ever seen.
There have been a few movies like this, especially in the kind of the 21st century, of like vampire movies that don't present themselves as vampire movies, right? Like if you didn't know the plot of this movie and you were just watching it blind, you would have to sort of pick up the pieces that she's a vampire. And the word vampire is never said until like close to the end of the film, I think.
Yeah.
And there's something about that, about the sort of the way that information is doled out in this movie of like, you see Ellie and her caretaker like move in and you kind of get vague hints at like their conversations. Like maybe you'll hear something through the wall where because Oscar and them, the walls are very like thin in this apartment building, I guess, and he can kind of hear the conversations they're having. And I just love vampire movies like this that are sort of very subdued about like it being a vampire, and doling out that information in very slow but interesting ways.
While also giving it, I think, a lot more sort of like this like humanity, despite the fact that the main point of it is like the lack of humanity. But just having it kind of be like, a lot of the stuff with Oscar feels kind of slice of life, even though there is conflict going on. There's stuff I didn't even mention about, like, he lives with his single mother, and he occasionally visits his father, who seems very distant and prone to alcohol. So this kid's living a wonderful life that we see. And that automatically puts you at an unease just on like a human level, right? Where it's just like, oh god, this shit's happening to this kid. That's rough. And then, oh look, he found a friend. That's so wonderful. I love it when kids can socialize and really like find connections when they live near each other. Those really important friendships.
The second line she says is like, I can't be friends with you.
Yep. That's the interesting thing. Yeah, it just feels so like it grounds you in that humanity, which, you know, like you said, grounded can be a loaded term. But I think it genuinely does give you just a base of like what the sort of human level of this emotion is. And then adding that genre context, I think, makes it all the more palpable.
Yeah. And like, as someone who like, I was never like bullied as a kid or anything, but I did spend like a lot of time as a kid alone and like, you know, didn't have a lot of friends. And this
wouldn't know what that's like at all. You know, people who host a podcast definitely have lots of friends.
The movies are our friends.
They don't judge me, I judge them.
Yes. This movie does capture that sort of loneliness, that childhood loneliness very well. And just kind of the boredom, kind of the like the listlessness. Not sure if I'm saying that word right. Just that feeling of like it's. I mean, it's all this movie. It's all covered in snow. It's very cold. It's very like a bit bleak in a lot of ways. But yeah, that the humanity really does ground it, especially like the very short conversations that he has with like his mom, or you know, especially the subtle ways. Like there's a part where the kids are bullying him, and I forget what they hit him with, but they hit him in the face, and he gets like a cut, and he sort of, you know, just kind of, it cuts to him at dinner, and he just casually goes like, "Oh, I fell at school. I was playing," and just that I don't know, the way it's handled with this kind of a humanity. It feels very sad in a great way.
Right. I think the closest to this I had seen in terms of even like vampire movies or anything like that would be like a Near Dark, which is very different aesthetically in many ways.
Yeah.
But there is the element of like, say, the Homer kid, the little kid who is basically like, who, by the way, I found out something interesting about that kid. I believe his name is Joshua Jason Miller. He's the kid of Jason Miller from The Exorcist.
Oh. Huh.
Yeah.
Very weird.
He was a child actor.
Very weird.
He also recently became a writer. He wrote that movie I told you about, The Final Girls. I recommended it previously on the show.
Oh, he wrote that. Okay.
Which makes it a lot more interesting considering, like, who he is and the plot of that movie being about a woman who remembers her mother only through, like, this slasher movie that she was in.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. That adds a lot more to that movie.
Yeah. God.
But anyway, his character in Near Dark is this like vampire who became a vampire as a small child, and there's a like brief subplot that involves him, like, they're staying at a hotel and he sees this little girl who's trying to get like soda out of the machine or whatever that's like his age physically but not mentally, and it's one of the more like, I remember being so upset by it, despite the fact that prior to this point in the movie I'm like, this is a fucking great vampire movie from the 80s, this rules. And then it's like, oh yeah, right. It sucks to be these people. It's so rough being a vampire, and I think this movie brilliantly extrapolates it, basically makes that an entire movie.
Yeah, I mean, like, a thing I want to talk about, which is like, for example, your Zoom background, which is the the scene where he hangs the guy upside down and the dog is like barking at him.
This adorable dog just coming up and
Yeah.
oh, Snow White dog,
Yes.
contrasting that blood, especially when she ends up licking it up.
Yep.
Yeah.
But this is kind of like one of the things about this movie in terms of like the way it handles like the grounded side of the vampire is.
Yeah.
We watch a lot of vampire movies, and we know the whole thing is vampires need to consume blood so that they can keep on living. And then you watch these vampire movies, and they're just like slashing and hacking away, and so much blood is going like everywhere. And this is a movie that like is like, well, no, if you were a vampire, if you were trying to get like blood, you would use like like a little funnel, and you would like drain the body because you would want to get as much blood as
much
possible.
of that as possible. Yes.
Yeah, and it's something that I just have always loved about this movie, where like the way he sets up his little the handler sets up his little kit, and like the way he sets it up when he's like outside, about to get slitten. But it is something that's just so interesting, and is like, it doesn't feel like one of those like grounded in a bad way sort of things, like pick any joke from the movie Renfield recently. It just feels like a moment that like grounds this in a way that I love. I think it's so interesting, and so like also just kind of horrifying, the sort of callousness with which this guy is like taking care of this business and sort of hanging this guy upside down. It's horrifying, but I love it.
Well, it's got, that Snow White clinical nature to it. I think that's the big thing. Is that because of the nature of the setting, and that it's just constantly snowing, but not to like a degree where it's like, oh, this is dangerous, but more in like, it feels like a purgatory. And I love the people of Sweden, but admit it. Like, it feels kind of like a very serene, but still it feels like purgatory, especially at night. This is a holding place.
Yeah, I think this is what attracts me to Sweden as a place. I think I'm very interested in that idea.
Living in purgatory, basically.
Yeah, but it's very beautiful and like,
Right. Yes. But I think that adds to sort of like the atmosphere here, where like everything feels so clinical. Everything, like I mentioned, that kind of slice of life idea. When we get to doing that like with Ellie, after we've done it with Oscar for so long, it helps connect these two characters who are similarly just like, seem roughly the same age, and one of them is very neglected, the other one was in a harmful relationship to some degree, maybe, the implications, because they don't spell out things that the book spells out, but it leaves you enough for like, okay, this is like harmful from like, either side of this, it's really rough. But then this little boy who needs some kind of connection finds it in this other sort of like lost person, but then there's all this like context to it. And it's treated just like, he finds out about it through vague context clues that she gives.
Right, yeah.
And then it's just like, convincing someone basically to make a very rash decision at far too young an age.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's my favorite aspect of the movie is the way that he sort of figures out that she's a vampire.
Yeah.
And, I mean, like, because we have the scene where he goes to make a blood pact with her, and she sees the blood and goes like feral basically, and there's a really unsettling shot where you get like she looks old, like she doesn't look like the 12-year-old kid, she looks like, I guess, like her true vampire self,
the Dorian Gray picture, if you will.
Yes. But then we get like the afterwards where like she's sort of saying like, you have to let me in, and like the horrifying scene where he's like, well, what if I don't? Like, is there like, I love the little thing where he's like, is there like a bubble protecting you? Like, is there a force field? And then like just that scene, which is like so quiet and is like a conversation, and yet feels horrifying with like just all the blood that's like, it's like
she's just being squeezed from within. Like her pores are being squeezed by like some hand.
It's moments like that is like pulls you from like this movie that is like you said, very human, and makes it like reminds you like it's a horror movie, which is just one of the brilliant things this movie does, I think.
You know what's a real horror movie? Growing Up. Am I right? But no, yeah. I mean, that's also what it's kind of going for at the same time, being at like that specific age, where 12, like it seems like Oscar has not gone through puberty at this point. So, and I want to give a credit to these two actors who, guess what, more names getting fucked up.
Yeah.
I don't know. You want to take a crack?
Yeah, let me crack at these Swedish names. Are you talking about the actors of Oscar and Ellie?
Yes.
Okay, yes. As Oscar, we have Kare Hedebrandt. And as Ellie, we have Lena Leandersson.
I like the Anderson.
Yeah. It's my best attempt at a Swedish accent.
Oh, is there another Skarsgård in the room? I didn't know there was another one.
Another one. So, I love the performances in this movie. And especially because children and child performances can often be like the worst part of a movie.
Right, you have a big thing. I think you're much harsher on child actors than I am.
A bit. I don't like kids. No, but I am. Yeah, I can, because I think I can be very susceptible to just like how annoying they can be in movies. A lot of child performances. But in this movie, like the humanity that these characters have, and I mean, Oscar's performance is great. I love just the way that this Oscar feels like such an idiosyncratic like kid. Like he's got all these like little, I don't know, just the way he moves, the way his mouth moves and stuff like that is so like unique, and I think he gives such a great performance. Now, I will say, Leandersson as Ellie is fantastic. I mean, like, because it's a very difficult performance of having to act like a 12-year-old child, but also be this immortal being. And I think that so many of like the conversations they have, just her mannerisms, just the way that like all of that stuff, I think she does a really great job in this movie.
Yeah, and I remember she won a bunch of like awards from like more smaller awards. Like I'm seeing here, she won the Online Film Critics Society Award. That's probably where I heard about this from, because I remember just like they have like a Breakthrough Performer Award, which I wish more award shows had, because I think that'd
be great.
I like that as sort of a, because they had the Junior Oscar like way back when like Judy Garland was around. That was fun.
Right.
But and the Saturn Award she was nominated for. Yes, I'm seeing here for like younger actors. So yeah, I had heard of her through just like all these things, and then just watching that performance, especially finding out the big thing I didn't even know about this until fairly recently, was that she's dubbed in the movie. That's not her natural voice.
Huh. I didn't know that.
It's Elifi Salen, I believe, because the whole thing was Thomas Alfredson really loved her look, but when he like saw the footage, he noticed just like, oh, she talks like a child, like her actual voice cannot like contain that kind of maturity. So they dubbed it over with this praise to that dub actress as well, because it's just good enough to where like it's like deeper. It sounds like someone who might have been through puberty, but not very far into it.
No, yeah, I literally didn't know that until just now. Like,
does that change your opinion?
It makes, I think, me like the movie more, because I never noticed that. It's not a very noticeable, especially because we've just watched a dubbed movie, this miniseries. So,
are you saying that wasn't Boris Karloff's accent?
Oh man, what a funny movie that was. But yeah, like and there's like sections where like I think it's after her handler like fumbles the second one, where like Ellie will go into like, I guess their natural voice, which is like this like sort of voice.
Where is she?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Actually, Christian Bale dubbed her in the American dub. Wow, not since Howl's Moving Castle have you participated in a dub.
Oh man, yeah. It is like that is such a great decision, because I think it's a decision I've never like noticed really. I've never like pulled attention to, and yet like noticing it now, I'm like, right, it makes sense, and also it just makes this character feel more developed and more fully fleshed out, which I think is great.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, especially considering like these two actors didn't do much after this movie.
No,
I looked
yeah.
because I was curious, and I looked it up. And I just gotta say, like, Lena Landerson doesn't even have like a filmography list on her Wikipedia page. A very lengthy Wikipedia page, yet not even a filmography. Unlike our male lead, who does at least have one other film after this, and I need to prepare you for this because this is wild. It's a teen Norwegian comedy where he's like the new kid coming from Sweden to Norway. And it's called Amor's Baller, which in English translates to Cupid's Balls.
Hell yeah. Look, those Scandinavians, they just have it figured. They have movies figured out. Okay.
I mean, especially when it's like it's a teen rom-com and it's called that.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. It also seems to not be a movie that was released worldwide, maybe. I don't know how.
Are you saying that
but...
a football film wouldn't translate very well? I don't know. People watching the World Cup, I'm sure. Bend it like Beckham, baby. Come on.
Beckham. Oh, man. But anyways, what were we talking about?
This is I'm sorry. This is the most I've done like dumb tangent like joke things.
It is.
And it feels weird for this movie.
It is arguably one of the most like quote like serious movies we've covered. I love it. It's great. This is great. This is a great episode. This is our best.
Yes,
one.
for sure. Well, put in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Sent to the web piece. But anyway, so yes, I think so. These two actors are very impressive. I think the whole cast really is, because we should talk about some of these other people. Like particularly, I need to talk about Virginia, as played by Ika Nord, who is part of that like sort of adult group I was talking about, and I believe she's Locke's girlfriend, a boyfriend. Yeah, girlfriend.
There's Locke and there's Yak, which doesn't make it easy.
The one with weirdly, like, hey, I love how we have been saying so many Swedish names. Locke is played by Peter Karlberg.
Very normal man name.
Very normal name, yes. And he's very good in the movie. Like, the both of them are, because I think they have sort of like the side tragic subplot going on just in the background about someone who's been transformed into a vampire with Virginia after she encounters Ellie.
Well, who is the first one to die though? Is it Locke who like after the first? No, is it?
Well, no, because Locke would be the guy who like dies last because she ends up killing him when he sneaks in. That guy.
Okay, so Yak. God damn it. So Yak is the guy in the little like underpass, like in the little bridge, right?
Yes, that's him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So like it's what is the sequence of events? Is it in the forest, the one your background dog?
That's like early in the movie, pretty much.
Okay, so is it like it's after I can't remember the sequence of events, but she basically Ellie kills Yak under the bridge, right?
Do I look like a scene selection screen to you?
Yes, but that happens, and then the cat lady sees, right? That is the.
But yeah, like her whole journey, Virginia's journey, is what I really want to talk about, because she's my favorite of the side people in this movie. Because it seems like her and Locke don't have a great relationship. They don't seem like, cause they just hang all the time in like these dank ass bars, just like talking about the past and just being total spoiled sports. And she's just like, I want to get the fuck out of here. And then at one point she does, because Locke's being an asshole. And then she runs across this little girl, and then she gets bit, and now she's a vampire. And just this character who was having it rough, not like horrible, but just like a kind of bummer of an existence, now has to contend with, I'm a vampire. And her one solace is like, I don't want to live anymore. So she has the power to at least have somebody open a window and exhume her in a giant fireball.
It is one of the most like striking images, I think, of this movie is that scene, which I had forgotten about. I was like, for some, I was like, doesn't someone catch on fire in this movie? And then that scene happens, and it is very impactful. But I do love this whole like not just Virginia's like story, but the whole side plot of like these characters who are like these like just locals, like just like living their lives and like whatever, and like yeah, the way that like they come into contact with the vampire, and it is like that sort of what we've seen so far of Ellie and Oscar's like lives, them together, the kind of sweetness, the like the gentleness that kind of happened, that the bond that forms between them, and then like that scene where Virginia is transformed is like horrifying and just like again pulls you back and shows you like this is like the horror of the vampire.
But we also need to talk about, I didn't mention it in my sort of runner, but the scene where like she goes back to the apartment, bunch of cats in the apartment, and we've seen there's a couple hints of like certain like of cats like looking at Ellie or whatever and being like ugh, which is a common thing in horror films. That's like always sort of like canary in the coal mine, not literally, different animal, where it's just like, oh, an animal gets upset at some being that we see, they're not good, we can't trust them. This movie goes one step above, where it's like that usually happens when some villain passes by a pet store. How about they walk into a home that is drenched in cat?
I do. Here's the thing with the scene though.
Yeah.
Because I like it in that sense, like of what you've described of like animals. You know, they don't like vampires. They can always tell. I find it a little goofy. Like a little bit, like just when she has all the cats on her and it's like like I find it a little goofy.
I think, well, there's a ridiculousness to that. I think that's the thing with this movie, is that it embraces the fact that there is a ridiculous otherworldliness to that, but presents it in this like really upsetting context. So we're like, I do agree. I mean, look, the CG isn't great on these cats, but I think at least it looks like it's that kind of CG jerkiness that at least works for me for like something that I know is real, like a cat, just fucking like pouncing on a human being. It just feels like uncanny valley unnatural in a way that like works for like the horror that's intended. But at the same time, yeah, she does literally like fling a cat out the window, which is both a very horrifying bit and kind of a funny bit in a really sadistic fashion.
Yeah.
Well, how do you feel about sort of, we haven't mentioned like maybe the bullies or the teachers. There's the one guy, the swim instructor, teacher guy, who I do love, like feels perfectly like a Swedish teacher who's not like an asshole, but also doesn't want like I love the scene where Oscar and him are talking at one point. He's just like, have you thought about joining the swimming club? Yeah, because he had heard about it. Oscar asked him about it. And he's just like, well, yeah, you know, if you train well, you'll get strong. Yeah, come by. You don't need to sign up or anything. And just the awkward beat, and it's like, see you. Just like the most polite way to say get the fuck out.
Yeah, I like him. I like him.
Yeah.
He feels like very much like, it just reminds me of like gym teachers I had in like school.
Yeah,
just very naturalistic. And
even when he like gets upset about like the fire thing, when the distraction happens near the end of the movie, I do love like he's trying to do the thing, like he's trying to do the swim teaching with like Oscar. It's kind of cute, and it's like, all right,
it's very sweet.
It's very sweet. And then just this kid comes up, the way it's shot too, it's just their legs. Kid goes up a bit to like whisper, and then the body language on that actor, just like the way his feet move, like, oh god, and then he like bolts for the door. Very natural too, of just like a teacher's like, oh my god, something's going wrong.
Yeah. I also do love the scene, speaking of the teacher, like when they're on like the trip, kind of that little like when they're on the ice, and both Oscar is about to like get some kind of revenge on he's gonna fight back against the bullies, and also they are finding not Yak's body, it's the first body, the guy who's hanging above Thomas right now.
It's more like to my left.
He is to your side. Yeah, but I love that scene, just the way that like he's watching the bullies. I love that he's like a teacher who's like, I fucking know who the bad kids are, and I'm keeping an eye on them. But then the way that scene is edited, where like you hear the scream of like the bully kid that he's hit, but the scream of like the kids across the like lake or whatever who have found the body, and just and
it's like especially one after the other. It's like, you hear the scream of the one kid long enough for it to register that something's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And then to your left, another problem has arisen.
Yeah, but I love that scene, and the way that it is also like, I mean, just the whole rhythm of this movie is so interesting in the way that it's shot and the way that it's who, by the way, we have not mentioned, but this movie is shot by the great Hoyt van Hoytema, who of course is now, he has shot Oppenheimer, he shot Nope. Great, incredible cinematographer.
A wonderful cinematographer, yes.
Mr. Handheld IMAX camera. I remember that fact that he was like
right
handheld an IMAX camera. Those things are like what, like 80 pounds or something? They're insane.
On what movie was that where he did that?
I think that was Dunkirk. Because it's like on the beaches, like he like was holding it on his shoulder.
Right.
Yeah, and this was his first film that he shot, and he of course worked with Thomas Alfredson again on Tinker Tailor. And so much of the look of this movie is, I think, him, and just the way that he shoots things, which is like so precise and so. I mean, I love like we'll get to the shot behind me of at the end with the pool, but like just so many of the shots in this movie and the editing rhythm of it is gorgeous and just is so understated, which is something I love about this movie. And
where it just feels like you have like a bird's eye view, like particularly that last sequence. Just
yes.
It feels like I'm just under this pool and I'm seeing all of this from this particular perspective. And I think that's a big thing. And I think it's a credit to Hoyt van Hoytema, who I agree is like one of our great like working cinematographers right now.
Yeah.
And also it's interesting how I think cinematographer is a much more like international kind of career path. Because
right.
I would say, because Hoyt van Hoytema, I think at least has had like a lot more of the success, and I think it's just because like his style just feels like it adapts beyond language in a really great way. Like truly, if I didn't have subtitles for this, which I remember a lot of people said that was the problem with the initial American Blu-ray, terrible subtitles, one of the more infamous examples.
Oh, interesting.
Apparently. Like really glitchy, fucked up subtitles. Which is why I never owned this movie, which I would have probably in like 2009. But just the style just really translates beyond language in a way that really works. It feels very like great visual storytelling.
Yeah.
Truly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is very interesting. I think the way that this movie, and especially because I'm comparing it a bit to the American version, how quiet this movie can be, and how he will often, Thomas Alfredson and Hoyt van Hoytema, because like the way that they will just convey something through a cut or through like just a very subtly. And yeah, I mean, that's the thing that makes this movie so great from a visual perspective, is that you could almost kind of watch it without subtitles in a way, or without like the sound on in a bit. But yes, yeah.
Yeah. Tragically, of course, after Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, that director-cinematographer team splits up. And
they do, yeah.
And because we had Who Shot the Snowman? Dion Beebe?
Oh, really?
Of Miami Vice.
And Spring Breakers, right?
Right. Chicago, and Equilibrium, Collateral, Memoirs of a Geisha, Land of the Lost, 9, Green Lantern. A fascinating career. But anyway.
Yeah.
Why don't we just get to the pool? We talked about this movie a lot. I mean, is there anything before the pool that we haven't mentioned we want to...
Well, what do we have? I'm trying to remember any other...
I'm going to say there's one thing we haven't touched on, which...
Yes, go on.
...is something also that is more explored in the novel, about the gender identity of Ellie.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because it's something they kind of dance around throughout a lot of this. There's a lot of points where Oscar very adorably tries to say, like, oh, will you be my girlfriend? And then she's like, I'm not a girl. She said that multiple times. Which you initially think that it's like, oh, is she a monster? I'm not a girl, I'm a monster. But it becomes a bit more skewed and kind of like murky as to what maybe her identity is. And particularly there is a shot while she is dressing where Oscar sees a brief glimpse of her changing.
Through the doorway.
Right, and we see just a brief shot of a genital area that
Yeah.
doesn't quite seem, like a traditional one necessarily.
Yes. And there's a great there's a scene where I can't remember which part it is, but they are talking and she says to Oscar, or they say to Oscar, "Would you still like me if I wasn't a girl?" And he's
Right.
kind of he's kind of confused by that, but he's like, "Well, what do you mean? You're like if you weren't a girl?" And he's kind of like, "I mean, yeah." And it is this very interesting way that this movie handles gender, and if sort of the yeah, and I love it because it is sort of a bit ambiguous, and yet there are those hints there where it's very interesting, and I think, especially for a vampire movie, to kind of go into that is so fascinating.
Yeah, and I'll just say in the novel, it's a lot more laid out about that backstory, which includes information that Ellie was an androgynous boy who was castrated centuries before by a sadistic vampire nobleman.
I don't love that. I don't.
Yeah, because it's
Yeah,
like, it's one thing, the way the film handles it is so much more, like, nuanced, and it feels like, once again, you're seeing it from Oscar's perspective.
Right.
On, like, both a literal way and then on a sort of, like, contextual way. And I think it's very smartly handled, especially just the way that it's shot and the way that it's put together, because there's obviously a way to handle this that would have been very bad. And it's a very delicate scene to plan out, and I think they do a really great job, particularly of, like, putting in the insert shot. The editing of it works really well, just to make it all feel, like, very consistent and very respectful.
Yes, and also kind of on a similar note, like the scene later where they're both like laying in the bed, which again
Yes.
is a very delicate situation you have to handle, but I
Right.
think is one of the most beautiful moments in the movie. I think where it's the moment where he kind of lets her he lets her in through the window, and like they have this beautiful moment where they go steady, and
Right.
she says like, "Well, do you have to do anything different when you go steady?" And he's like, "No, not really." But it is that kind of childhood innocence of like,
Yeah.
we're boyfriend and girlfriend now. I don't know what that means, but we're boyfriend and girlfriend now.
And I don't know how long it'll last, maybe 48 hours, but
Yeah, but it is so sweet, and it's such a beautiful moment. But then I guess what we should also mention is that Locke, the husband of Virginia,
yeah.
has kind of been poking around, finding out. How does he find out where she lives again? I can't quite remember. I think there's like a rumor of the little girl, right? And he goes to
Right, yeah, I think because it's connected, I think, to the caretaker. I think.
right.
Right. I
So
believe. Yeah, it's like the announcement of like his death, and then the mystery behind it, and then kind of following the track of the murders. He becomes a little sleuth, a little
He
detective,
does. Yes,
a little Harry Hole, if you will.
little Harry Hole.
That was my Snowman Saturday morning cartoon spinoff that I kept pitching. No one would take it.
I wonder why.
I had LIL apostrophe and everything.
Oh fuck. It was a goofy episode. I love it.
I think
I
it's
love
all
it.
my fault.
It is. This is all you. I'm innocent in this. I'm absolved of all sins. Um, but the scene I think where like, which is after the like blood pouring from her like head and everything, and
Right.
where he breaks in.
The great twist on the literal the titular vampiric rule
Yes,
of letting
let
someone
the-
in, inviting them in. I think it's the
Yes.
best execution of that particular trope I've seen, because there have been others that have attempted that, and it doesn't quite work as effectively. It's just like her rumbling, like her physical acting during that.
Yeah, yeah, and then that kind of goes into where Locke breaks in,
Yes.
and she kills him.
And that's the most, like, we don't see any of the carnage of it.
No, which I think is so brilliant. I think it's such a brilliant choice where he is like, if I remember correctly, it's Oscar sort of like slowly backing up from the door, and you kind of get the sense that it's both from like horror at what's happening, but also kind of like okay, I'm just gonna give her some space really quick to take care of this.
That's the important thing about any relationship. You need to have your alone time.
That's true. You got to give them alone time when they're having their dinner, even when their dinner's a person.
I keep asking her, can we bring the TV trays in? And no, she just wants to have it in her room.
Yeah, but yes, and then that goes into the pool scene. Where to begin with this?
Well, I mean, we set it up partially with like all the stuff with the one teacher leaving.
I will say, what we did set up, by the way, is the bully's older brother.
Right.
Which is another scene I really love, where he's like hanging out after school. He's doing the thing, which is it's so sad, where he's like looking around behind, like peeking around a corner to see if his bullies are around. Yeah. And the bully has an older brother, and it's like the scene where, and again, it's very like subtle, kind of in a way where you're like, okay, I understand this kid's family life as much as I need to, basically, to kind of get context.
They do a great job of dulling that with the bullies, because this can often be a cliche I don't like in a film. Yes. Where they sort of have like a bully who ends up being this like sadistic, because we're going to stand by our hot takes. We're an anti-bullying podcast.
Yeah, well, sometimes.
Well,
sorry.
That can often be a thing, though, in movies of just like, let's make these bullies like the most evil kids possible. Just like the most ruthless, vile possible people. And it's not quite that. They're awful. They're bad people, like I mentioned earlier, but in very human ways. And then, especially with like this kid who gets like hit, and like the way that whole sequence is done is so brilliant to like establish all that pain. But then just when we get the reveal of the brother, he was somewhere like, I was around his age probably when I watched this movie. And I'm just like, all this like kind of reedy dude who has pimples very clearly, like he doesn't look like the toughest kid possible, but just the fact that he's like 3 years older and taller is just immediately like, oh no, my defenses will never get past this.
Yeah. And I mean, I love the way that, like, while we're on the bullies, I love that, like, there is clearly the one kid who he's a little shit, but then the other two kids are kind of just like going along with it, like they're his two like little cronies.
His toadies, that's how I love to use. My favorite term, toadies.
But the way that that's handled, where it is like, you understand kind of like the dynamic between his, like, oh, that's clearly where he gets his like mean-spiritedness from, just that whole section is great, which leads to the section at the pool, which, I mean, is great. I love this sequence so much.
Just like the build up to it, where you have that earlier thing I was mentioning with like the teacher leaves, but then you just see that like they have the various different bullies stationed, like one in the locker room and one like in the hallway, and just indicate like this is a multifaceted operation.
Yeah.
And the way they just do it, like then they just storm in and they're like, everybody except him leave. Like that's all they say, and then they like all skedaddle, and the knife comes out, and just the shot focused on like that, switchblade just propelling outward, and then the whole thing was like, you're gonna go underwater for 3 minutes, not breathing. And we do a couple cuts where it's like we see Oscar underneath the water, and then we see the clock, and then we see all the bullies like looking at each other.
There's one of them that like sits down and is kind of like, what the fuck are we doing here, kind of thing, which I love.
And some of them are just anxious, just like, is he like gonna die?
Yeah, like,
he's not gonna die, right? We'll just leave him after this and he'll be fine. Then we cut under the water, and we have a shot that stays underneath the water where like we just see the hand that is holding Oscar down, and we just hear some stuff in the sound mix of just like really like, oh, weird sounds that are happening. Like the door opens, I think we hear initially, then some fucked up like commotions going on.
It's very muffled,
And then that kid gets dragged and kicks his feet underneath the water. And I can't tell you how, like, when how old would I would have been 16 when I saw this movie. Maybe 17. So I was just like, this is what real art is. I feel like I'm watching the Old Boy scene for the first time. Very much in that state of mind. But I thought this was amazing. This is just one of the most brilliant shots I'd ever seen in a movie.
Yeah, I mean, it still kind of is. I just, the way that it holds on him the entire time, and
Yeah.
like, you hear the commotion going on, you hear it kind of muffled, like talking, kind of some
Underwater.
screams, yeah. You kind of think you know where it's headed, and then you really, like, you see it, and you're like, oh, this is the sort of big catharsis that we have been kind of waiting for in a way, and it does feel a bit cathartic. And then it cuts to this shot, the pool, the wide shot of the pool,
Yeah.
and it is both cathartic and also a bit scary and horrifying.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's because those bullies felt like actual children, delinquent children, ruffians,
Yeah. Hoodlums.
scoundrels, who, just like felt very naturalistic. And then when you see that the bodies all around, it kind of feels like, because that kind of impulse, that like Oscar's whole thing is a feeling that like any of us have had, maybe at some point, that basic feeling of just like, oh, I wish I could do something
Right.
to like that person who like messed with me for some reason. But then Oscar, like we said, they hint several times that Oscar feels like he's on the road to, serial killerdom at some point. Harry Hole will investigate him once he comes of age. And then, just this moment happens, and to him, Oscar, it is a win.
Yeah.
It's a huge win. And he's like, oh, my wonderful love has come to save me. I am the damsel who was in distress, and she ended up saving me. And now I get to live my life with her by going on a train with a big box.
Here's the thing about the scene and why I think that sort of it's so great, because I remembered this being the final shot of the movie,
Right.
and then it cuts to like a black screen and there's like snow falling, and I was like, movie over, great,
Credits
I feel
roll.
great, let's
Coming.
go. Yeah.
Tomas Alfredson, I'll clap at his name.
Yep.
He'll never steer me wrong.
Yes. And then it cuts to the train scene, and I, rewatching it this time, I kind of went like, oh my god, right, this is the real ending of the movie. And I kind of love it. I think it's really beautiful, and doesn't necessarily provide any easy answers, and I think I love that about it. I think it's really, really beautiful the way that it ends with just these two on the train, and you don't really know if they'll like, work it out or what's gonna happen, but it is this like, they have found each other and they have found some like companionship in this cold, dark Sweden that we live in.
Right. But
But
the
Yes, go on.
implications of it at the same time, while all of that is stewing in your brain, there's also just a certain point where you just realize, like, I think that's the initial thing. It's just because he's traveling with her in the same way that Hakan was doing
Yes.
earlier. Mm-hmm. And so just this whole kind of like thing where that catharsis is once again exuding also such tragedy.
Yes.
So much like horrible tragedy to happen. Even we didn't even talk about this, but like I love the way that his mother is sort of depicted in terms of, like you mentioned, we don't get a lot of scenes with her, and she doesn't even have like many lines in the movie at all. I think the dad even has more lines in that one scene where like his buddy shows up like, hey, let's drink, bruh. Well, that's a kid, cool. Which is like such a realistic like neglectful dad thing.
Yeah.
But then yeah, just the contrast where like the mom, when she comes back home after she's just like found out and everything, right? Because that's what happens, right? She like comes back home and she starts yelling at him, and he goes to his room and like closes the door, and he looks at his toys and he leaves. Basically, the next thing is like him going over to the pool.
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, but it's over. Like, what did she find out? Was it about like the thing with the bully?
I think
Was
it was
that
the thing with the bully, or is it the scene where they are both at his apartment, and his mom is like knocking on the door, right? Is that
Right,
what
and
you're
she's
talking
like,
about?
it's silent,
Oh,
but you can see her screaming.
Yeah, I think it's just that he had locked the door, and he's kind of like.
But she comes back angry. She's like yelling at him from the start, because that's the whole thing. It's like after, like, it's after the one guy dies, Locke. After the one guy dies, there's just this shot of like the mom coming home and immediately just like screaming I can't understand what exactly she's saying because there's like played over score and there's no audio dialogue. But it's her like screaming at him, and he just looks dejected, and then he immediately goes to his room, closes the door, she starts like knocking, and she's still screaming the whole time.
Yeah.
But what was that in reaction to? I'm just asking.
I think it is like the like kids what he did to the bully, like hurting his ear or whatever.
Best episode ever. I get the movie now. Anyway, so yeah, but that relationship I think just perfectly kind of sets that undertone for all of this that's going on. That at the same time that like this catharsis happens and they find each other and they leave, it's like that kid's leaving a mom behind who doesn't have a lot.
Yeah.
And also he's leaving behind any sense of true security, because he technically has security in that Ellie will just fuck up anybody that messes with him. But also he has to be under her thumb, this ancient old vampire who is in this body of this kid who has lived so much more life. It's just like, I don't know, I really like you, so you want to like hang out with me and be my bodyguard and my source of food and my like basically protector, putting that responsibility just the rest of your life. That's what it is. And it's with a kid. Little kid, you're not going to be a little kid forever, kid. Unless she bites you and makes you a vampire, maybe? But that's not indicated.
Yeah, no.
That's not
but
indicated,
it is that ambiguity, though, of like, what, you
Right.
know, like, do you read that this is a happy ending for them or not? Is kind of like, it's the kind of, the thing, which I really love. And I mean, like, a thing I thought about this while watching the remake, which we'll get into in a little bit, but like,
Right.
the fact that like, and I was really upset to hear about that whole like origin for the handler guy, because what I kind of gleamed from that was kind of that, and the American one has like a shot of like it's like a shot of the girl but with like another kid, and it's like an old picture. So in my head I was thinking, oh,
This was a previous kid.
right, who then she's a similar like,
that was also my initial read.
Yes.
When I was younger, and then I read the book.
Yeah, I'm not listening to that. That's still my read of the movie.
Not canon. Not my
No.
canon.
Yeah. But yes, I think that there is that there a beauty in that they are together, but yeah, an underlying kind of ugliness and horror that like at the implications of it, which I think is the real beauty of why this movie is so great.
Well, you know, those sound like pretty solid start to final thoughts, Brian. So your final thoughts on Let the Right One In, any stray things you didn't mention, or just overall summarizing things about this film.
Yes. Let the Right One In. I love this movie. I liked it when I first saw it, and it has gotten better. Both rewatches I have done over the past few years. It's such a unique movie about vampires and vampirism, and an interesting horror movie in that it is, yes, a horror movie because like a woman gets set on fire and like people get mutilated, but it is not a horror movie in that, or rather, it has a lot of humanity to it in a way where it feels more like a human drama, but it is still a horror movie. It's a very unique movie in that way. It's a gorgeous movie. I mean, like, I really just cannot like emphasize how good this movie looks. I just love the look of it and the rhythms of it. And yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that Tomas Alfredson can come back and make a great movie, because clearly he is very talented. Yeah, a great movie, a great unique horror movie in the sense that it is like, usually when we talk about horror movies and kind of what horror movies we recommend, it's like gory and bloody and whatever, but this is a very beautiful horror movie and a very sweet horror movie. Yeah, I love it. What about you?
Well, I want to start off my final thoughts by reading a bit from a review I definitely remember reading that got me interested in this, from Roger Ebert.
Hell yeah.
Our buddy, Roger.
Our boy.
Our patron saint, that isn't Steven Spielberg. Roger gave this movie 3.5 out of 4 stars, calling it a vampire movie that takes the vampire seriously, drawing comparisons to Nosferatu and Nosferatu the Vampire, which I love. This is copied from the Wikipedia. Spoilers, but Just the way that they just like to films like Nosferatu and the other Nosferatu. But I get the initial comparison. He describes the story. This is directly from the review of as two lonely and desperate kids capable of performing dark deeds without apparent emotion, and calling it the best modern vampire movie, which I think is a title that it kept for Mr. Ebert, I believe. I don't know if he ever said that again before his passing.
Yeah, and I would say this.
I didn't read his Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 2.
Man, it's on his great movies list. What do you mean? All 5 of them. I think this is one of the better modern horror vampire movies and depictions of vampires. Roger Ebert, he pretty good at his job.
Right, but to continue with my final thoughts.
Yes, go on.
I mean, I agree with him and you, obviously, about this. I think it is one of the great modern vampire movies. I think it's definitely one of those where, like I said, the reason I glommed onto this was more because I was like a big sort of like person who read movie critic, like especially genre critics, all the time. It was just like, oh man, this sounds great. This sounds like a fucked up vampire movie. Because this is like when I'm in high school as well. And I'm deep in just like, yeah, I want the weird shit. I don't want any of your mainstream stuff. I'm watching foreign cinema. And this movie comes in and I'm thinking, oh, it's going to be more like sort of like a gorier thing. Because it's a vampire movie. And the gore's there, which I think adds it to where like any horror fan, I think, who respects genre, like that genre for like what it's capable of on, our horror season here. Just truly like a movie that has gore and intensity, but also is truly like Roger Ebert said, like taking this all so seriously. Genuinely investing in just like what attracts one to a vampire? What humanity makes you interested in a mortal being who could be your forever mate, but with the sacrifice of you can never really be with humanity again. That is a very old story that has existed since before Dracula. And it's just a curiosity that, we get this kind of thing from a country that, like, not a lot of Swedish films become box office hits in the States. Can't think of too many.
Right, yeah.
But just this is the epitome to me of just like discovering a movie that has like such an interesting different perspective and a style and just so much that like an American couldn't do for me when I was younger. Just realizing that and then just really grasping at like what the horizons to be, especially for like genre cinema. And I think it's one of those rare ones as well where like there are other ones that I watched around that time that I dread rewatching because I worry like, is it just like that nostalgia is going to be completely destroyed? And like, for example, it's not completely destroyed with this movie, but I rewatched Old Boy recently because, it had that release and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'll just say Old Boy like is still a great film that's very well crafted, but I see the cracks. I see the holes. I'm not in that like
Harry hole?
Sort of a bit hairy. That guy, the main character,
he's got
huge head of hair at the start.
He does. Great hair.
Yes. Great hair, wonderful hair. But certain things just irked me in the wrong way. And with Let the Right One In, as much as like so much of the stuff on paper could do that, like say reading the novel did that, at the same time, like the movie itself never loses. I think that kind of like that great sort of perspective and tragedy and just interesting take on the vampire genre. I agree. It's one of the great vampire films of recent memory. And an appropriate M for Masterpiece pick that we had here, but we gotta briefly talk about at least the remake, which you mentioned. But this is one of many foreign films that after, it gained some kind of cult popularity in the States, immediately a remake would be announced. Mm-hmm. And, it's Matt Reeves directing, and it stars little Cody Smith-McPhee.
Yeah.
And Chloe Moretz.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get a chance to rewatch this movie. I rewatched it last when I did that panel, so a couple of years ago. But you rewatched it for this.
I watched it for the first time.
Oh, okay.
I had not seen this movie. I had heard of the remake, and I'm very averse to American remakes of foreign films for obvious reasons. But like, I never knew that Matt Reeves directed this, who I secretly like love. I think he's a great director. I really like this movie. I really like the American remake, which is called Let Me In. Is very similar to the book in a general sense. I guess the main things that it changes that I think are interesting and to talk about are it removes the well, it doesn't remove, but it very much changes the like locals where you have like Virginia and our boys Locke and Yock to be like he has like neighbors that he can kind of like see through the telescope and he kind of spies on them a bit. But what it kind of does is it replaces that with you were saying how one of Locke or Yock, one of them turns into a bit of a little sleuth towards the end of the film. And this movie has a detective played by one of my favorite actors, Elias Koteas.
Yes.
Who's great. He has a great mustache, great glasses in this movie. But as I really like what it does, what it kind of changes. I like the Elias Koteas kind of character, the way he's sort of investigating it, and his performance is great. Richard Jenkins plays the caretaker in the movie.
Yep.
And what I will say about this movie, though, is it is very much an American remake of Let the Right One in that the ways that the Swedish film is very subtle and very subdued. The American one is not in the sense that there is a lot of dialogue. I will say, like, when the handler pours acid all over his face, I don't believe you see it in the Swedish version too much, right? There's, like, a little peek you get.
You do get at least one full shot of it when she's draining. Like, the moment she starts draining, there's, like, shot on it.
Yeah. In the American one...
it leads up to that for a while.
Yes. In the American one, it is like full, like you see it the entire time, and it looks fine, whatever. But I also think this is interesting because they haven't changed the setting in this movie. It is just transposed into America, but like it is like Reagan era evangelical kind of
March 1983, so like just a year after the original would have been set.
Yes, and so like there's
maybe they take place in the same universe, man. The LMRTCU.
God. And God, I lost my point.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. Fuck, what was I even saying?
You were talking about Let Me In.
Yeah.
We're talking about Richard Jenkins.
American
remake. Did some things wrong.
Oh, right.
Not subtle.
Yeah, it is like I like the ways that it is putting the story into like 80s America, where there's like talk of like, you know, evil and like kind of that whole thing with vampires, as opposed to like the like his mom is more evangelical, kind of very strongly religious in the American remake, and
it's a bit more subtle than like, because the thing is, this was still when like in 2010, 80s nostalgia wasn't like as overplayed as it was. It was still kind of fun, and I think this one at least like I was worried revisiting it. I remember in 2019 about like, is this gonna be like fucking the beginning of Stranger Things? And it's not.
Right.
It's more ingrained in that culture than I would say even Let the Right One In is.
A little bit
for the most part. Well, the thing is, we're not Swedish, so we don't know. I don't know. But at the same time, with like Let Me In, I remember really loving it when it first came out because I was actually kind of curious. Obviously, I had the trepidation like, oh, is the American remake going to be bad? It's going to work. And then I remember, I think this was like something that it had a TIFF and then Fantastic Fest. This was still when like a lot of these movies like Let the Right One In I heard about through like those Austin kind of like specifically around that era. And so it was definitely one of those that I was curious about because I'd heard, oh, it's actually good? Oh, that's interesting. All right, let's see. And I remember loving it at the time when I saw it theatrically. And then it was one of the few because it did not do very well, if I remember right. It was not a success. Yeah, for a budget of $20 million, made 27. So
not bad. Yeah, not great.
Not good. But at the same time, I think they did a really good job with it, and I thought I was really impressed at the time when I revisited it for that panel. I will say it lessened quite a bit for me I still think it's like one of the better examples. Like, it keeps the spirit right, and I think the performers are all really great. Like, this is still Cody Smith. I think this is my introduction to Cody Smith McPhee. Because had he done anything prior to that?
He was in The Road before this. That was kind of his, like, big, that was
right,
the year prior.
This is early,
so.
though.
Yes.
This is still early in the Cody Smith McPhonazance. But yeah, I remember, like, he was really great. And Chloe Moretz, who is such a fascinating sort of child actress of that era.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yes, which is like the way that she came up and then her sort of evolution, I think has been very curious. And I remember this was still like early for her as well, and I was like, wow, she's clearly great. I mean, I just saw Kick-Ass, which I loved because I was 16.
Have never seen Kick-Ass.
That's a movie. We'll definitely. That's like my like Adam had Boondock Saints. I had Kick-Ass kind of thing.
Right,
just embarrassing shit only a teen boy would like. But anyway, yeah. So this was still very early for them. And this was around the time I started noticing Richard Jenkins. I thought he was great. Elias Koteas, I found out around this time he was the guy from the Ninja Turtles movie when I was a little kid.
So weird.
Yep. And yeah, and even Dylan Minette's in this. He's one of the bullies.
Yeah, he is. He's like the main bully in this, which is very funny.
Right. Yes. So I will say I think the cast does a really great job, and I think Reeves is a great director. Particularly, there's a great shot when a car crashes and you're inside the back of the car. I remember that being the big hyped thing, and I thought, like, yeah, that was really great, and it looks really good. But I still feel like it's kind of what you're talking about. I think it does remove a lot of like the subtlety that's there in the original movie.
Yeah, like
in a way that makes it more of like a genre movie. That's still good, but I don't think quite as impactful.
Like a good example, I think, of like the two, comparing the two movies and kind of their you know, whatever, like they're comparing them, I think, is like the scene where the bully like scratches his face, where in the original it is just like one of the kids, the other bullies, is like, man, who's gonna tell that to his mom? In the remake, it is Dylan Minette, like one of the bullies is like, come on, man, who's gonna tell his mom? And then Dylan Minette walks up to him and says, you're not gonna tell your mom anything. You're going to tell her you fell down. And it's sort of explicitly said. And I prefer it in the original where it is very subtle, where he's lying to his mom about it.
I don't know. As an American, I prefer it when characters tell me what they're going to do. And then they do it.
Yeah. Yes, it is very much that. But I think, I mean, like you mentioned, it is very well directed. I mean, like, I think Matt Reeves is a great director. And I think this movie, looks great. I think it is very well directed. It's also, again, another great cinematographer, Greg Fraser, who shot the American remake, which is just so interesting.
And you know, we should point out something, Brian. I think this is also a first for you. This might be your first Hammer film, because this was part of the.
This.
Yes, yeah. Hammer restarted, or I think with this movie, if I'm correct, it was like around like the early, because right after this was Woman in Black, the Daniel Radcliffe movie, which I know was like their big theatrical.
Right.
Like they're big, like it made a lot of money, like in February of 2011. I want to say
2012. 2012. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I remember like this was around the time they were starting like, let's do new Gothic horror films for modern age. So yeah, now you know everything about Hammer. You don't need to watch Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing or any of that bullshit.
It is so weird. Yeah, I saw the Hammer logo and I just thought like, I saw it has like the like. They do a kind of thing where they show like the old Hammer like renditions of those characters and stuff like that in like the thing, and I was like, oh, it's that Hammer films. Like it was very weird. I do also want to point out, just kind of last thing here, is the music in the remake is Michael Giacchino, who is great. So
right after he had won my heart with 2009. When I still like really downloaded soundtracks on that 160 gig iPod I mentioned an hour and a half ago.
Yes.
I had a lot of soundtracks from Michael Giacchino downloaded that specific year because of Star Trek.
Yes.
Which I think is a genuinely great like adapted score. Doesn't get enough credit. And then Up, which
is a great score.
You can even admit
it's even though I don't love that movie, I think it's a very great score.
A deserved win for his Oscar and everything.
Yeah.
And also, now that guy's directing things.
He is.
It's so weird how he's directing things, because that never happens.
Yeah, it's a weird pipeline of composer to director.
Which you'd think that would happen more often, but no.
Yeah. Yeah, and that Werewolf by Night thing was not like the best thing ever, but I was like, he's got chops.
It was a
he's
good
got the
proof
juice.
of concept.
Yeah,
Basically,
yeah.
he treated it as, and now he's going to be making them, allegedly, the Ant movie.
Right, he is doing that. I'm excited. I love Giacchino. I think he has like, I mean, I think The Batman is one of the best comic book movie scores of the past, I don't know, 15 years or so, maybe more.
Particularly that main theme is like,
Yeah.
especially for a
man.
character crowded with memorable themes.
Yes, exactly. I think but he's great. And yeah, I think what surprised me though most about the American remake was that it is good, and it is, at least for me at least, different in some ways where I think it is interesting to watch. Like, I feel like usually with these kind of movies it's like, just watch the original, like, foreign language one. It's better, even if the American remake is good. But like, I would not be opposed to someone like watching the American version of this movie for some reason. If they wanted to watch that one first, I would not.
Right, by which you mean the Showtime original series that ran from 2022 to 2023, if I'm right.
Yeah, something
Which,
like
by the way,
that.
we have not seen. I was telling Brian, like, I'm going to watch the pilot for this, and it's
Mm-hmm.
nowhere. This show, because it's on Paramount Plus, it's apparently on Showtime, but no one has Showtime. They have Paramount Plus because they want Showtime now.
Exactly. Yep. Streaming is great. There's nothing wrong with it at all.
Especially because I'm sure, because I was talking with Brian about this. This was so weird. We're like, within months after the American release of this movie, they had announced, because I followed slash film like all the time at this point in my life, there was this like announcement of TNT doing a Let the Right One In TV show.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so like 2009, cut to development hell for a decade.
Yeah, basically.
And then it suddenly comes out on Showtime. It lasts a season, and then it's gone.
Yeah. An unfortunate, like, just reoccurring thing in the streaming age, I think, is that, like, hey, they made a Let the Right One In show, and it kind of doesn't exist, which is a bit unfortunate. I don't know.
October 9th through December 11th, 2022, starring Damian Bashir,
Yeah.
Anika Noni Rose, Grace Gummer, Nick Stahl. This is a weird cast.
It's a very weird cast. Oh, it's got this guy, Zelkio Ivanek.
Yes, he's a recurring character. And I want to read the premise here. Mark Kane is a single father who has been protecting his daughter, Eleanor, after she turned into a vampire 10 years prior. She's stuck in the age of 12 ever since. Hoping to find a cure together, they've been hiding and running across country until they finally settle in New York City. Meanwhile, Eleanor meets and bonds with a 12-year-old boy, Isaiah Cole. As a scientist, Claire Logan is brought in by her father to help find the cure for her brother's vampirism.
Okay, I haven't seen the show, and I don't want to like pile onto this show that already doesn't exist, but that does not sound fun, and it does not sound good
that
at
sounds
all.
like someone development noted the fuck out of the show.
It does. New York City, like, yeah.
Well, also, like, the protagonist now is not a little boy who has been seduced by this vampire girl. It's a father who's trying to protect his daughter.
Right, yeah.
Stuck permanently at 12. Because that's how I treat my daughter. Just like she's forever a 12-year-old now. Now it's perfect. She never hit puberty. Everything's great. As I'm going around trying to solve vampirism, too. Just like, it turns it into, like, The Fugitive or something. It's like, why?
Yeah. Again, which is why like the American remake of the film, I think, is quite good.
It doesn't feel like that. That's what you would expect from an American remake. of this movie.
Exactly. Yes, and that movie is not that. It is instead just an Americanized version of it that also just happens to be made by a pretty great director, in my opinion.
It's one of the good ones. I would just.
Yeah.
It's not a huge club.
Not really. That would be very
No.
interesting to see what are
Do we
the
do a
good
series out of that?
American remakes.
We do our season on American remakes.
God, that's a rough season.
A lot of E for egregious picks.
Yeah, it's just all E's.
Except
Six-
for like, oh, we
6
found a good
E's.
one. We found a good one. But anyway. So that is our discussion finally on Let the Right One In. with no tangents and a wonderfully concise.
So brief.
Right.
Almost too brief, actually. Let's keep going.
For sure. But, we can't because we got to do our segment Between the Lines. So every episode, Brian and I do the segment called Between the Lines, where we recommend a movie that's related to some degree to the movie we're talking about, maybe another M for Masterpiece pick, maybe just something related to the movie itself. So Brian, what's your pick?
Oh man, I've brought an absolute banger today. Thinking a lot about vampires, thinking a lot about the 21st century in vampires. So I picked a film from 2013 from Jim Jarmusch, Only Lovers Left Alive. Probably my favorite Jim Jarmusch film, I will say. I think this movie's great. So to briefly run down what it's about, it is about a vampire played by Tom Hiddleston who is living in Detroit. This is post Detroit's I don't know how to describe it, but like that whole Detroit going bankrupt kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's a much more nuanced way to say it. Yeah.
The city literally went bankrupt. No, that's
okay,
accurate.
Okay, I thought that was just kind of like a,
No, you think that's a joke? No, it's literal.
Yeah. Okay. Right. It is sort of post Detroit going bankrupt. Everything is kind of decaying, and he is depressed. He's a depressed vampire who makes like music. He makes like industrial, like noisy, like brooding rock music. Like it's great. I love the music that he makes. And his lover is played by Tilda Swinton. They've been together for centuries, but they live apart for various reasons. And another, like, we talking about the great modern vampire movies, I think this is maybe the one for me. I think I absolutely love this movie. I think it has so much of the qualities that make Jim Jarmusch's films great. Like there are the certain trance-like sections where like the music is going, and the way he depicts vampires eating blood or drinking blood is almost like this like high where they like lean back in the chair, and like all of those kind of trance-like qualities, but also I think has the like hangout qualities that Jim Jarmusch can have as well. Like they talk a lot about music. They go visit Jack White's house, which is such a funny bit in the movie. And I think, like we talked about, is a great movie that depicts vampires in a kind of grounded way, depicts the sort of depressed, suicidal vampire in that way. You've got Mia Wasikowska in here as well. She's a great performance in this movie where she plays Tilda Swinton's sister, who's a bit more chaotic in a way. John Hurt as well, the great John Hurt. And also, in a performance I just love his performance in this movie so much, is Anton Yelchin, the great late Anton Yelchin, who I love so much. And also, like, Jeffrey Wright shows up as well in there, and there's other people, but it is a fantastic movie, a really incredible, like, depiction of the vampire, and also a great sort of, like, depiction of the vampire in the sense of how Tom Hiddleston's character views the world with this like nihilism that is like I think also doesn't help. The Detroit setting helps that as well. It's a great movie. I love it. It's my favorite Jim Jarmusch film. Yeah, you've seen this movie, right?
Of course I've seen this film.
Yes. Do you like this movie?
Yes. This movie's great. I love this movie. And this was probably the first Jarmusch I saw, and I haven't seen a lot of Jarmusch's admittingly.
I think this is also my first one, yeah.
No, I'm sorry. It was Ghost Dog Way of the Samurai, one of the great films.
A great movie. Yeah, I should rewatch that one, but yeah.
But this is one of the few other ones I've seen, and I think it is great. I think it's just such an interesting movie where like we were kind of debating this off mic before we started this, where you told me this pick, and you were like, oh, even though it's not a horror movie, I'm like, up. I would say it is still a horror movie. It just happens to have like this different aesthetic to it. Because I just have a sensitivity to that, because to rant about my days being a horror podcaster, which this would have been the year I started doing horror news radio. So
okay.
I remember being like such a huge fan of this and really praising this. Certain horror fans can be very protective of what's considered a horror movie. I remember hearing that a lot about this movie and at that time when I brought it up, say, on that show. And I just think that's so misguided, because this is still like a great vampire horror movie. But just from the perspective of like, I don't know, these guys are like chilling out. Vampires chill out too, guys. Like when they're not sucking necks all the time, when Dracula has invited over a lass to his castle, they gotta chill out. And they're like hanging out talking about like bullshit and listening to great music. And then John Hurt shows up as, who is he? Again, he's like an actual person, right?
I think in the movie
he's Christopher Marlowe. Yes,
who is like, and in the film he is like the guy who wrote the Shakespeare. Yeah, actually wrote
the good one of those, not anonymous.
Yes, like
the Roland Emmerich film, but
he is sort of like, oh, that fucking fake, that phony Shakespeare, as like a picture of him is on the wall.
But it works in like almost the way of like a movie I recommended a couple episodes ago, Bubba Hotep. It's a horror movie just from the weird perspective of like, yeah, this is what happens in the off time.
It is, yeah, and it is like that thing of like I said, like that hangout style that Jarmusch has, but like,
yes,
it also, another thing about Jim Jarmusch is he is fucking cool. He is so cool. I mean, like the sunglasses and everything. He's a cool guy, and his movies are cool. And this movie is very cool. And I mean, like, there's a scene early on where Anton Yelchin is just showing Tom Hiddleston like these old guitars, and it plays out entirely, and they're just talking about guitars, and it's great. I love it. I think it's just so great, and I think a genuinely great performance from Anton Yelchin, who is an actor I loved. I still love. He rules in that movie. I miss him.
Yeah, that was one of those celebrity deaths that really affected me too. Just from like the shock of it. It's like him, Philip Seymour Hoffman, like those. What?
Those
that
are the ones
just happened.
Still get me when I see them in a movie where I'm just like, oh god. Yeah,
for sure. But I mean, also, I do want to shout out also. You speak of Tom Hiddleston, obviously, like him and Tilda Swinton were kind of like what the movie was sold on.
Yes,
I do want to emphasize that, like, seeing this movie at that particular time, where like Tom Hiddleston, Loki Tumblr shit was just leaked onto the other parts of the internet, pretty hardcore. And it still is, one of those proofs to me of like, Tom Hiddleston is a very talented actor. He's not just Loki. He's one of the better actors to like rise out of the MCU. But the problem is that I think he picks more safe projects than he should. But at the time, this is an example of like one of the interesting choices he did.
Yes, yeah, and especially if you like know about his background from like Joanna Hogg's early films, which are very weird and interesting, but like he is incredible in this movie. I like, it truly is a tragedy to me that he has gotten like sucked up by that Marvel thing,
especially after he had an out. He had to clean out.
He had to clean out. And I mean, yeah, like I said, around this time, this is when he's doing like High Rise. He's doing Crimson Peak.
Yes,
not a great movie, but he's in Kong Skull Island, which is at least an interesting like choice for him to be making. And
he made such an impression. Like, I like that movie more than you do, a lot more. But he's like, him and Brie Larson are just non-existent in that film, despite being kind of our main human characters.
Yeah. And I mean, he's good on Loki, but like, I'm sorry, but it's a Marvel thing. I don't care about it anymore.
I don't know. I have complicated things because I liked the first season of Loki. That was probably the last Marvel thing I did genuinely like.
Yes,
but now that season 2 is coming out, and for many reasons, it's just kind of like, oh man. Even though bummer things, like I was kind of excited when I heard Ki Hu Kwan was going to at least get another job for getting that Disney check. I liked Owen Wilson a lot on that show, but I just don't know if I can even watch that second. And it's coming out in like a week.
Yeah. Hey, I got the McDonald's meal with the little sweet and sour pack that had the little Loki logo on it.
Oh, I wonder if that's written by Rick and Morty writers.
Oh God, no.
I mean, it is. Spoilers, it is. But anyway, now,
yes.
let me go ahead and introduce my pick here. Great episode, running great. We're not going too long at all.
Professionals.
So my pick is another film that I would consider an Emperor masterpiece. Would have come out about 8 years or so after Let the Right One In came out. And it is a film, though not from Sweden, but South Korea. It is the 2016 film Train to Busan, which, if you don't know out there, is this sort of disaster zombie movie in which we follow our main lead, who has, and I want to say a couple of names at least. Apologies once again for fucking up names. Gong Yu, who is a fund manager, and his wife recently left him because he was too selfish. Literally, they describe that in the dialogue. And they open up one of my favorite things to indicate like somebody has fucked up royally is like he comes home with like, oh fuck, it's my kid's birthday. He has a little daughter, and he comes back home, and he's like, hey, look, I got you a present. And she opens up a Nintendo Wii, and then she looks over to her TV, and then you follow him as he looks to the TV, and there's another Wii that's been clearly used that you would have gotten like last year pretty much. And he's like, oh no. So he decides like, you know what, I'll let you have a weekend with your mom, so I'm gonna take you on the train to Busan. Said the thing. And I'm gonna take you on the trip. I'm gonna drop you off, meet with your mother. And at the same time all this is going on, we see an opening credits scene a deer who has been run over in the middle of the street, and then suddenly it gets up and it starts moving, and it approaches a car that's about to come by, and then we cut to the train boarding. We meet a couple colorful characters who are going to be seeing down the line as they're all stuck in this train, where one of the attendants arrives and has a little bite that he's trying to cover up, trying to work at his job, and then zombie outbreak on a running train, folks. That's what this is. And these zombies are vicious. The initial sequence where a zombie comes up, it is just like you see a person die, and just like it feels like, oh, they just died here. And then the way the bodies contort, the way that they move, it feels so visceral in a way that like works perfectly for like this amazing like crowd pleaser of a movie. This movie, like I saw this because I did the horror podcast, and this was a movie we got as a screener.
Ooh.
I got to see it early before its like American release, and I was like, oh, I'm curious about this. I've heard a lot of good things, and I love having that with like a movie that like I just know so little about, and then going into it and just being like blown away to a degree. This is just one of my favorite movies that came out this decade. I genuinely like love just the way that it does a lot of like the Irwin Allen disaster cliches. Like it's not like, it's definitely like a genre movie both in terms of horror and a disaster specifically, because it has that whole setup of like we're on this train, contained space, something horrible happens, we have a few ragtag passengers who become our heroes, including, I want to mention him because you might have seen him recently in Eternals, Ma Dong-seok, who was like the tough guy in Train to Busan. And he has a whole sequence where like at one point, because the whole thing is they're trying to get to the front. They're all the way in the back, and they have to go all the way to the front of the train to stop it. But they have to go through all these like different cars with zombies. And there's one that's like completely full of them. And he's like, you know what? We're gonna like get some of like the overhead like container trays, take them off, I'm gonna put them on my hands, and I'm gonna bum rush through these guys. Because I'm this big, strong, hulking dude. One of my favorite scenes in a movie of the last like 10 years or so. Such a brilliantly executed like horror sequence, action sequence, and also just like tense thriller sequences I'd seen in a movie. I love this fucking movie, and I try and like spread the word of it. When anyone ever asks me, Thomas, what's a really great underrated like horror movie? It's Halloween, spooky season, I want to watch something really good. Train to Busan fucking rocks.
You know, you have picked a good time, because I have not watched this movie, despite like...
I've been telling you about this ever since I saw it.
You
I
did.
knew you at the time.
I remember when you saw this movie, I had heard about it, and then you had been like, this thing's fucking good. And I just have never gotten
I gave
around
this
to
exact
seeing
same
it.
speech.
Yeah. But I will be correcting that this year, I promise, because... yeah, it sounds great. I've always been like interested in it, and it's always been on like those like underrated horror movies you haven't seen kind of thing on those lists. It's always like at the top of them. So yeah, I need to check it out.
I mean, I will say this, Brian. I told you about this. A local independent theater near the both of us is playing this film theatrically.
Right.
I think, if I'm right, on the day this episode comes out.
Let's find
The
out. real
24th.
quick. Tuesday, October 24th, 7 p.m. Yeah, you're right.
Yep, and which will be the day this episode comes out.
Yes. Yeah.
I've never seen it in a theater, which is like a thing I would love to do.
Yeah.
I'm at least glad that I can convince somebody to be really invested.
Yes. Yeah, I'm excited to watch it. I'm excited.
It was interesting also, I just want to shout out the director briefly, because the Yeon Sang-ho, who was an animation director prior to this.
Huh. Interesting.
And the only other film of his I've seen is the animated sort of side quel, I guess, called Seoul Station, which is about sort of what's going on at the same time, but in Seoul. It's a pretty solid, like, it's that kind of cell shading animation.
Sure,
He's the style he works in a lot. So, like, he did that, and he's done a couple other animated films prior. And after this, he did, I know there was this, like, weird superhero comedy called Psychokinesis. Then the spin-off to Train to Busan called Peninsula, which I heard was a pretty good action movie.
Yes. I don't know if I've heard anything about that. I just heard that they were making a kind of sequel, kind of like parallel
But it was
thing
like,
to...
but it's a whole side story. It's
Yeah.
It's like what's occurring on the other side of this. And I had seen Soul Station. I was like, that's
Right.
pretty good. I can't wait to see this. And everything I heard from people was like, it's all right.
Yeah. I'd still be curious to see it, though.
Yes, but let's go ahead and repeat our titles for everybody out there in case you want to add these to your spooky watch list. Halloween's a week away from the time we're releasing this episode.
That is true, yeah. Michael Myers is almost here.
Yes, and we're not recording this early at all.
No.
We don't do that. That is the one professional thing we do. We do bank our episodes, but that's where our professionalism ends, basically.
That's true. Yeah.
But what's your title, Brian?
Yes, I had Jim Jarmusch's 2013 film, Only Lovers Left Alive.
And I had the 2016 South Korean film, Train to Busan. But now we're going to be wrapping up the show, but stay tuned to find out what we're doing next. And we just want to thank some people while we're heading out. First, we want to thank Burial Grid for our music on the show. Purchase his music at burialgrid.com, which I haven't said the title of the track. That's actually our theme music. I just want to shout it out. It's really good horror music. It would fit on a Halloween playlist. It's from his album Where We Go from 2018, and it's called M Was the Shape of Its Mouth.
Cool.
Great title.
Great title.
Wonderful title. Yeah. Proud to have it as our theme music, sir. But anyway, thanks to him. Purchase his music, at burialgrid.com. Thanks to Michelle Kyle for our artwork. Follow her at MishKyle96 on Twitter. And thanks to our supporters on Patreon, patreon.com/cinema2letter, where for just $1 a month, you get access to, bonus episodes that we like to record. We like recording side things, including, as of yet, you would have heard our Friday the 13th big marathon, which we're about to record after this.
Boy.
So yeah, we'll talk about that. And then this shouldn't be, maybe not too long after this, you will hear the Universal Drive-In thing, where I took previously, a couple days ago from when this is released, to a drive-in where we talked about a bunch of Universal monster movies and saw them and introduced Brian to the world of that horror. But I should mention, of course, at the time that this episode's coming out, the following day, so October 25th, if you're a patron, you'll be able to vote for one of the movies that we're going to be doing for next season, which we're announcing it here. We might as well, that our next season is going to be focused on a studio celebrating 100 years, Disney, going very different from the horror track, as it were, to that studio that everyone loves and owns everything. That's why we love them. And so we're going to, though you all get to pick for, a rebellious bit against Disney, because we're going to be talking about the egregious pick. We got to have the bad one. You all get to vote for which one of those we do. And we have two very different films for them to vote between.
Yeah.
So our first option here is Tomorrowland, the 2015 Brad Bird film starring George Clooney. That was a big summer sci-fi extravaganza that went awry in very interesting ways. There's a lot to talk about with that movie. We both have not seen it since the theater.
Yeah,
We both like Brad Bird movies for the most part.
love Brad Bird, absolutely.
But yeah, so that, or the other option, which is the wild option, the 2002 film based on the Disney theme park attraction, The Country Bears. A wild movie that is on Disney Plus that you all can watch. Celebrates 21st anniversary. And so I'm curious, Brian, because I introduced both of these to you as potential topics. What do you hoping the patrons go for, if you can pick a favorite?
You know, and if anyone doesn't know what The Country Bears is, please Google it. Please watch the trailer because it'll pay off.
Brian was not aware, and I told him, and he Googled, and he was transformed.
Wild, just very weird.
He hasn't even seen the movie yet, everybody.
No, I'm looking at the poster, I'm looking at the letterboxd heading, and it just goofy. As much as I would be down for that. I'm kind of pulling for Tomorrowland. I had mentioned this to you. We hadn't seen it since 2015. And also, it's just the only Brad Bird movie I've never, revisited. You know,
Yeah.
I've revisited Ratatouille and Ghost Protocol. I've just never revisited Tomorrowland. So I would be very interested to see where it falls in my Brad Bird ranking and how it maybe changes my feelings on him and his movies and stuff like that. But, yeah.
I think either of these are very fruitful for discussion.
Oh, no, of course, yes.
It just depends on what kind of episode do you want. Do you want more of a Wish Upon episode? Or do you want more of a Van Helsing episode?
Fair. Very good point, actually, yeah.
Just depends on what the patrons might want.
Yeah.
And, like I said, for the $1, you get those bonus podcasts and also the ability to vote for what we talk about. You control the schedule with us. You're a fellow programmer for the cinema to the letter. But to find us, we're at Cinema to the Letter everywhere on your Instagrams, your Blue Skies, your Facebooks, your X's, and all sorts of other places. Whenever there's on social media, we'll be there at that particular handle. And for me, you can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at NotTheWho'sTommy. And I also do some writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com and at film-cred.com. And I just want to shout out on the Film Cred review, we recently had Shaquille Lambert as a guest, my buddy, who you might have heard if you're a patron, do the Saw X audio review, which was a wacky, wild, dumb thing that we did. That was very fun. And so definitely become a patron of Film Cred if you have the cash and help out the writers on that site. And hi, El Peralta, the host, who I am, because I produce that show over there on the Patreon, my partner in crime.
Yes, and you can find me on Twitter sometimes at BRYAN, DRADE number 3. But you can mostly find me on Letterboxd, just logging movies, making lists at my name. And go look at my lists. That's my
Look at the lists, people.
Yeah.
The lists.
We make them for a reason.
For more of those reasons, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or other podcasting platforms, whatever you have, whatever podcatcher app. If you're listening on Talk Film Society, you want to listen to all the other great shows on that network. And you can also dig into the archives in our Podbean main feed for, the first season, early episodes of this season, all the Double Edge, Double Bill backlog stuff, all there. And, if you can't support us, financially with the Patreon, that's cool. Money can be tight. We're all good with that. But the completely free way to help us out is to rate, review, or simply share the show around to give us more visibility. And especially, because we're two very lonely, sad boys who hang out in Sweden.
We are. Yeah.
Waiting for vampire girls to notice us.
Playing with a little knife, just stabbing a tree.
I'm not doing that. I'm playing with the Rubik's Cube. You're doing the knife thing. I'm just like, dude, I'm lonely, but Jesus. What are you doing? That tree didn't hurt you. It already has enough notches. Brian! Well, on that note, we got to end this episode. Somehow. I know it's gone by in a flash, but we have to end this episode because we got to announce next time it's the season finale, everybody. For our horror season premiering on Halloween. Midnight. That's the plan. Spooky time. The spookiest day.
I'm getting scared. Just you talking
We're
about
going to be
it.
doing our A for Atypical choice for the season, which was Exorcist 3 Legion. So, yep, we're going from this austere sort of, foreign film that came in and had such a weird originality to it to the second sequel to The Exorcist, which you'd think would be terrible. But I don't know. I don't agree with that. And Brian, you still have not seen that yet.
I have never seen it. I still have only seen the first Exorcist film, which I will be rewatching in a couple of days. I'm very curious because everyone says it's a masterpiece. So I'm very curious.
Yes, there'll be a lot of discussion about the Exorcist franchise. We'll also be definitely talking about, we should mention, Legion, the director's cut.
Right.
Which we will try and watch as well. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about all of that next time on our big season finale. But until then, everybody, have a quiet, restful sleep in the sweet Swedish snow.